This is Andrea with Parking Lot Debrief. All right. This is part two. Still here with Cameo talking about the interpreter shortage. Please tune in to part one because we talked about a whole bunch of good stuff that we just couldn't stop ourselves. So we had to keep going because there's a lot to talk about. So we'll just continue on. We are still talking about Tseng and his framework for professionalism of folks in their field. And we've gone through a handful of characteristics and how we are barely an emerging profession, still getting ourselves developed through all these years. So we're going to continue on with the different characteristics. And the next one I see here is code of ethics.
Yeah.
What do we
So
have?
we
Hey,
do. We do.
all
So
right.
we've already talked about systemic theory, authority, credentials, induction, and now, right, we're at code of ethics. So yes, we have a code of ethics. That is a feather in the cap of
Woo!
our field for in terms of this spectrum of professionalization. And when Anna Witter-Merrithew and Leilani Johnson wrote their paper, they actually scored code of ethics high for the interpreting field because we did have a standardized CPC that was generally widely accepted.
Right.
Now, the market disorder that was definitely a thing back then in 2004 when they did their study, and is still an issue now, is the inability to enforce this code of ethics without some kind of mechanism in place to hold non-credentialed, unqualified
Mm,
interpreters accountable. Some states with licensure have addressed that issue with their licensure. In Arizona, we are not one of those states, unfortunately. Arizona is one of the states where the commission only has jurisdiction, I guess, over interpreters who are licensed. So non-licensed interpreters, we can take them through the process. We can send them a letter to educate them. We can even bring them in front of the board um, to discuss the issue and kind of like slap their hand. But there isn't really a
law.
system in place that
Right.
allows us to do anything about that.
So,
And I know that there's a lot of states that are like that too.
so we have a CPC, but it's only applicable to those who are certified and can be reprimanded if they don't follow it. You're
Right.
speaking about those who aren't certified and possibly break one of those CPCs, but they aren't beholden to it because they don't have that certification.
Or
Um,
just the sense of working as an interpreter without a state license,
yeah,
right? Which c certification either through RID or BEI is required to get your state license, um, at least in Arizona, again.
right.
Um, but yeah, there's
Well, and
there's nothing more than we can do but really education. And
and
and so that ends up being a drag on the code of ethics characteristic
there's no
that
oomph.
right, right. That kind of policy is holding back our profession from being from moving further along on that spectrum. On a wider scale, we could say that the ADA plays a huge role
Yes.
in the market disorder with code of ethics because in the ADA, it only says that an interpreter needs to be qualified, right? They go into an explanation about what qualified like kind of sort of means, right? But there's nothing that states like a credential, like you must meet this to be considered qualified under federal law. Their whole intent was for states to determine that for themselves, that they felt that was the kind of thing better decided at the state level. And at the time in 1990, maybe it was, certainly they could not have foreseen that interpreting would become such a nationally connected thing with VRI and VRS and the ways that interpreters from all over are providing services to deaf clients in wherever. Um, so it certainly seems like that needs to be readdressed with
With
the current status of things, right?
well, in Code of Ethics, the CPC, great thing to reference, great thing to obviously follow, um, and be a moral human being. But when we study for those tests or talk with student about all of these things and use the CPC, it's always well, it depends. Or interpret it's up for interpretation, pun intended. And as is like a qualified interpreter is up for interpretation of what in that situation, which leaves way too much flexibility. But we work with humans and we are human, and this is a human process. So, how do you put such a hard rule on X, Y, and Z? So, that one's a toughie.
I mean,
Someone
yeah,
research
this
it.
this just goes back to that conflict between relational versus transactional,
That
right? In order to be a fully fledged profession, you need credentials, you need metrics, you need ways to categorize the ins and the outs. And that's really hard to do with interpreting,
very.
right?
And it's
Yeah,
what's really hard is we don't have other fields to lean over and ask, what are you doing? Because like you're saying, the spoken language, they're ahead in some things and well behind in some other things. Often I try to think of hairstylists, massage therapists, just in terms of the transactional, the 1099 work, the schedule type we have, but even that isn't applicable. It's so hard to not have any of the other profession to reference.
sometimes I feel like therapists
Yes.
are
Yes.
kind of close to us, and they do have standardization. Um, and it can be, independent contractor work, and it is dealing with people. Um, they
Right.
certainly they certainly have systems in place where you need to get licensed and have degrees and pass, you know, different
Right.
metrics or what have you.
Supervision and all that stuff.
That's
Huh.
paid, by the way.
I wonder if that could be a study or if someone could map out how that could look for interpreters if we were to follow something like that. And then somehow we implement it. Like I'm just trying to think of legit processes that could, and I'm sure someone has looked into it. I would
Yeah,
love to talk about it.
there's probably studies out there. I will tell you that ACDHH is this year embarking on an apprenticeship program
Nice.
that is going to pay the
Wow.
apprentices and the coaches, the mentors. So we'll at least be one data point to see if it scratches the surface or throws pebbles at the freight train. Will at least be studyable and we'll have lots of, data from the results of this process.
Speaking of pay, the next characteristic here is compensation, which is a hot one.
Super hot.
Super hot, super sexy. Um, and I absolutely will have people on this show to talk about money. I know you've been in contact with CJ and Steve, folks doing the interpreter income survey. Well, they'll be on to talk about that. Money. What do you guys say about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the first episode that in the survey that we sent out to interpreters, one of the questions they were asked is, what do you think is causing this shortage?
Ah,
And pay was the number one
oh,
answer from interpreters.
oh.
Um, so I think that as when we're talking about market disorders with compensation, I think that there's a lot of points that show conflict, right? One of the fundamental points is we're all scared to talk about it. right?
Yes.
We don't know where that boundary line is. There are some settings like uh, um, discovery interpreting, which was run by RID, so we couldn't talk about rates because then it was considered like price fixing.
Price fixing. Well,
Yeah.
my workshop is the business of interpreting, and that is a slide that has ranges ish of BEI ones or basics up to nationally to just what in general are people charging or making in these areas. And almost every time I've presented this when it was at a regional or local RID sponsored workshop conference, I got in trouble mid presenting. Don't you dare. We will turn this Zoom off if you continue to talk about prices because you're price fixing. It's in the bylaws. And I'm like, respect. I get it. I understand. But me giving a range that ranges with $30 in between is not me going, Cameo, we're all going to charge 25, okay? Everybody do it. Like that's different. I think it's different. Granted, I'm not a lawyer, or I don't know the intricacies of what actual price fixing is. And to me, if I can just speak freely, um, it feels as though if we are told, no, no, don't you dare talk about money, whether that comes from agencies or anyone else, it feels very controlling to keep us separated in our spaces because that's a way for them to control the narrative versus us. That's just my opinion, and I think others share it. Hence
Agreed.
why I'm like, damn it, we're going to talk about money. And it's going to be in a respectful way. It's not going to be a way of all agreeing. But if you're showing up to a job and I'm charging 20 more or 20 less, and we're on the same page in terms of all the criteria, I think it's appropriate for me to be like, are we kind of in the same range? Cool, cool. It's not that we have to have the exact same number. So
I
that's
think
my
I
soapbox
think I think
about
there's an
money.
argument there. I think there's an argument there for the CPC tenet of respect for colleagues, right?
Dang.
If
Yes.
if I'm if I'm underbidding you, that's not
You're a
very
jerk.
respectful.
Right.
Right, right. So it's funny that you bring up your workshop. So I'm sure that by the time people watch or listen to this, this will have already happened. But in the beginning of February 2025, ACDHH is holding a virtual Business of Interpreting mini conference. Andrea is one of the presenters. She's going to be giving her workshop. But one of the other workshops that we're offering is a hour and 15-minute conversation with a business contract attorney. And one of the questions that I plan to ask that attorney is, what is considered price fixing? When can we talk about rates? Where is this okay? Now, of course,
Ooh.
they are an Arizona practicing attorney, so their answer may be Arizona specific, but it's definitely something that I plan to ask because I have the same questions. I'm an
Right.
interpreter, man. I don't know about economics of collusion of price, like, right?
And I want to respect our ID and what they have in place. That makes sense. Of course, you don't want everyone being like, we're going to charge $150 and everyone's going to do it, so everyone's stuck and has to pay it. Like that's obviously not what we're trying to do. But what are you finding in regards to interpreting with this part?
Yeah, so I agreed with you in this study since pay was such a focus of people's answers, right, from the survey responses that we got. Um, I felt that it was appropriate to report out, just like you said, to report out what that range looks like for Arizona.
Was
So
there grief or gruff from anyone about reporting these numbers? Just to even say them where people are like, don't do it.
it was not that I heard, and it was
Okay.
Google form.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if anybody was icky about it. And I believe I made that question optional. No one
Okay.
had to. I think all the questions were optional. I can't remember. I might have just lied.
Okay. I
But
just wondered
anyway,
if, yeah.
yeah, I didn't hear. I mean, honestly, I'll be completely honest. Most of the like anecdotal buzz that I hear around the community is very similar to what you were just saying.
Yes.
Why aren't we talking about this? Why
Please.
isn't this more transparent? Where is the line of price fixing? Like people seem to, I haven't heard a lot of argument against doing that.
Right. Right.
And I certainly haven't heard any arguments after I shared the data that we found
And what was that?
from the
Which,
survey. So
yes.
I wanted to compare how much Arizona interpreters were being paid at some point in the past with how much they're being paid today.
Because
Unfortunately,
oh, sorry. I was
no,
saying
go
you're going to
ahead.
say it because that's, I'm sure we don't have data from the past often, unless we're asking agencies or others who've been around.
So we
Do we
actually
have data
do.
points? Okay, good.
We actually do. So NCIEC, National Consortium of National Consortium of Interpreter Education Consortium, NCIEC, and another organization that is not, I can look at my works cited from, or you can, you at home can look at the
That's
works
right.
cited from the study. So there were several national surveys that were sent
Mm,
out to get a finger on the pulse of what the like essentially a state of the union of the interpreting field on a national level. I didn't have any data for Arizona because a study like this had never really been done before. So I recognize that this is not necessarily apples to apples, but it's all that I had to go off of. So what I did was the most recent survey data was from 2012. That was national. In that 2012 survey, interpreters reported that they generally charged between $25 and $55 an hour. Most of the interpreters were in that like $40 to $50 range.
in
Okay.
2012.
That was in 2012. When I asked Arizona interpreters how much they made, we were still pretty much in the same range. Interpreters still responded by 25 to 50 an hour. And remember, my survey went out to community interpreters, freelancers, staff interpreters, and K-12 interpreters. So we've got everyone in a big bucket here. Okay.
Hmm.
So same range, but it was heavier on this side. So in 2012, same range, but most of the interpreters were making about 40-ish dollars an hour. In 2024 in Arizona, same range, but most of the interpreters were making around $50 an hour. So the math was a little tricky, but it ended up being slightly less than a 10% pay increase in those 12 years. So interpreters in general have seen about an 8 or 9% pay increase in those 12 years.
And
But then I noticed,
well,
but then I
first,
noticed,
should I, right, but first, should I Google what is the average pay increase for just general professional growth? Is
you
it
can
about 10%?
no,
Like
you
when
can
you
find
move up,
you can
well, how
find
many?
that in the COLA, the cost of living adjustment, and
Right.
that's something that is easily findable on the Social Security
Mm,
site. I don't have the number right in front of me, but 10% in 12 years is not
low.
anywhere near what it should be.
And
In fact,
you have even a
I
better fact after that of other
I
areas of
I
growth.
actually I can't remember if it's in the study or in notes that I took for one of the presentations that I gave about this. But oh, tell me.
I just Googled in 10 years, how much should my pay increase? According to typical trends, blah, 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 10 years should ideally increase up to 40%,
Cute,
3 to 5% every year.
cute. So for Arizona, I looked up data about median income, what was considered um, like the poverty line of
Hmm.
Arizona, the median house prices. So I don't have the data in front of me, so please don't quote me on this. But the median house price in Arizona in the past 12 years increased like 250%, but
Which is,
interpreters pay raised 8%. Um, the what most K-12 interpreters reported earning if they had a family of four that was relying on that salary, that would put them well below the poverty line.
and And I will say I've kept track of my funds on a spreadsheet very diligently for years. And I've said this to you before too, that my pay has remained in the same $25,000 range this whole time
Hmm.
for years.
Hmm.
And my husband didn't know much about interpreting, and I would tell him about it. And he's like, "So how do you like where do you move up? What's the up?" And I'm like, "I've got a master's degree, I've got BEI master, I've got the national certification. I don't know what more up there is.
Right.
I teach." That's what's I feel like that's another piece that may fit into one of these characteristics of our lack of being able to professionalize. Where's the up?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And so that is an issue with our pay, right?
Right.
Just in general. But that issue becomes borderline maddening
When you say
when
this next part.
you see the statistics for agencies, for referral agencies.
And how much
S-
their income has gone up.
Right. So remember, interpreters in 13 years, 12 years, 13 years, our pay has increased 8%. Okay. So we looked again at the data from that 2012 national survey. Okay. At that time, agencies that took that survey reported charging between $50 to $75 an hour. Most of the agencies reported being in like the $40 to $50 range. When you look at the data from the Arizona survey in 2024, agencies are charging between $70 and $130 an hour. That's an increase of over 50%. I think it's 53%.
Yeah.
So interpreters' pay has gone up 8% in 12 years. Agency profit has gone up over 50. Now, there is something to be said here in the difference between the what ASL, like exclusively ASL agencies are charging
Right. Right.
and spoken language agencies are charging. I put them both in this bucket. So please, there is a clear separation there. We found that the ASL exclusive agencies were on the lower end
Right.
of that rise with some differentials and, last minute requests and things that would bump it up to the mid to high range. But most of like that base rate that is, 110, 120 and up, most of that was from the spoken language agencies that answered our survey. And I should note that not many spoken language agencies did answer our survey. So it's a very small data
Right.
set. But
But I can
anecdotally,
apply.
it's
Right.
it's pretty in line with what I've heard being
And
out there.
I can do a whole episode of me getting on a soapbox about my frustrations with agencies. I also adore many agencies and human beings who run agencies and feel there's a lot of good ones out there. They have to make a profit too. They have to run a business too. Their ability to compete and get into those spaces has gone up as well. So like I want to have agencies on and have this conversation. So I don't want to say that we're like, damn you agencies, it's all your fault. It's not. But the numbers, I would love more research, and I hope maybe that interpreter income survey also maybe touches this a little bit, because
Yes.
I always have an issue with the lack of any regulatory anything overseeing of agencies. Um, and I would say that's where a piece of our authority slash agency can come in when we speak to agencies, because we also are running a business.
Right.
So that's a whole other thing, and we've got other stuff to cover, but man, that's a compelling one. And
Mhm.
I would imagine, as you said, number one answer, one of the most frustrating pieces. And I can tell you, I can name 5 interpreters right now who are like, I don't want to do this anymore. Why? This is how much I'm going to make forever. Like, this
Mhm.
is they don't feel they have anywhere else to go.
hmm And all the other things that come with it. Like I'm not
Yes.
growing
To
in this
fight.
field. I'm not
Yes.
able to um, increase my living wage, and I have all of this extra shenanigans to deal
Right.
with, right? And that actually is a perfect segue to the next characteristic, which
Beautiful.
Tseng called community sanctions. It's essentially the public's recognition of a field as like a legitimate, respected profession. I'll give you two guesses where ASL interpreting falls on that.
My family members still don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
No.
my mom still thinks I teach deaf children.
Yes. Yes. So you teach them like, I mean, I do, but not what you think.
Oh, when I actually started teaching, it really messed things up.
Wait.
Uh-huh.
Wait.
Uh-huh.
I
hmm
can't.
So, I mean, how many times have we gone to an
Oh,
assignment and someone's like, "Thank you for volunteering your time," or like,
you do this every day?
this isn't your real job, right? Like you
I
do this
tell
full time?"
students, I tell students that you probably already have students being a student and telling people what you're going to school for. You have an elevator pitch, you have a one-liner or a response to that because you will get it forever. And I have to approach it with humor or I'll be maddened. So,
Right. I
correct.
actually
General society does not.
I used to have a very similar I mean like I that whole thing about having the one-liner so that you can just like
Mhm.
apply it whenever you needed it. I made that our final assignment
Yes.
in the classes that I taught. I called it interpreter microaggressions. And me and a bunch of interpreters came up with all of the questions that really well-meaning people ask
Yes.
you, but it starts to make you want to gouge out your eyeballs.
Yes.
And then, so I had this whole list of questions. I assigned chunks of because there was like so many. There were so
Sad.
many. And so I assigned chunks of questions to each student, and then I assigned a an interpreter in the world. And that student had to contact that interpreter and ask them what their like elevator one-liner is in response that is something that keeps you sane and at the same time is respectful and uses soft skills and all of the
Yes.
things. Then, this was my favorite part. On the last day of class, we would always have a big potluck, kind of like a party. But then we would play like whose line is it anyway games where the questions were in a hat and we'd bring up and I'd always have a couple deaf people come into class. So we'd do little skits where the deaf person was the deaf consumer and I was the hearing person and the student was the interpreter. We'd pick out of the hat what the question was. I'd show the deaf person. We'd like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, some kind of like, how do we torture them in the sweetest sense, right? And then we would do a skit where at some point in the skit, the interpreting student would be faced with that question and how do you respond? Right. So not
Because
just
it's
like
real.
having that script, but also like applying it in the
Yeah.
moment. Because the worst thing is when those questions come is you're just like gobsmacked. You
Or in the
freeze.
middle of interpreting.
Right?
Well, and
Right.
that's what I wrote down is I see the examples here of like how we are burnt out of constantly explaining ourselves, not being understood. Our role is conflicted with what people think we should do. We don't have understanding. All of that weighs on us. All of that weighs on the deaf community.
hmm
All of that is translated and put out there. Tell them. Um, tell the deaf person that's a piece. Making fun of the interpreter in a comedy show. Like all of those little things
Making fun of
then are
interpreters' facial expressions in
a
emergency.
news. Yes. All of that
Right.
is harming the deaf community. So if we can, and I try to have grace. Some people tell me the job they do, and I'm like, what the hell is that? So like we don't know every job that's out there for a human being. So I can't always expect folks to know who we are and what we do because we're in it every day, so it makes sense to us. But I have had to let go and join a space of grace of being like people just don't know because
Right,
I was angry most of my 20s. I was like I was angry. So, but I can
right,
feel how this would be. And along that, how do we become recognized? Policy, exposure,
right.
laws, that all the other things have to uphold that for to be recognized.
Right.
Ooh,
So that lack of the public's understanding or recognition of what we do, that it leads to burnout. And there's tons of research on interpreter burnout. In most people, like the lay person, assumes that burnout is going to be physical, which it totally is. I mean,
right,
it is a magical unicorn of an interpreter who can last in this field for 30 years and not
yeah,
be crumbling from every
right,
joint socket of their
right.
body, right? I always tell my students, interpreters are like NFL running backs. We have like a short shelf life, and you have to prepare for the fact that this is not a job that you may be able to do cognitively or physically until, whatever the retirement age is going to be when
Right, when
we
we
are
get
old
there.
and gray, right? But what we found in not only the survey responses, but also tons and tons of research that has been done on interpreter burnout, that the emotional and psychological
Oh,
burnout is
more
what
than anything.
pushes us out of the field more than anything. And that includes the the market disorder of community sanctions. So it includes being misunderstood and undervalued by society, being uh, feeling like we are let down by systems that we should be able to rely on for support, like RID, right?
Mhm.
I I don't I am very rarely part of the group that is RID bashing. Very,
Right,
very rarely, because I don't feel like I understand enough about how the sausage
same,
is made to have an opinion about that.
same.
However, I do see places
More,
where
right,
I wish some organization, some system were doing these things. Is is my expectation that it should be RID? Is that an unrealistic expectation? Maybe I don't
right.
understand the
Maybe
system
it's the
well
wrong
enough.
place we're putting it. Right,
I don't
same.
know, but no one's doing it
Right.
and we need it.
That's
So
all we
like
have to look at. So,
that's kind of where I sit with that, right? But also things like all of these new agencies that have come onto the field that are offering ASL interpreting. And I know nationwide, we are all constantly getting those like
every email
template
found your
form
name on RID's
emails,
website.
right? So that extra time and energy of vetting these new agencies
Yes,
and trying to explain to them why it's not the same as a spoken
yes.
language interpreting situation, right? All of that advocating for the profession and for our deaf consumers to make for companies to make our deaf consumers the priority, right? In that interaction to fight against companies and entities that are putting profit over integrity.
Right.
All of that fight is part of community sanctions.
Mm.
And so when I read this part, I felt so validated because there are so many times that I've talked to people outside of our field and tried to explain this in a succinct way and ended up getting looked at like I was whiny.
Of course.
Like,
Well, and that's what I kind of wanted to add is, and sadly, I feel like I have to state it that we're sitting here going like, oh, interpreters, and it feels very
it's
like
so
we have to do
hard.
so many things and advocate, and we're not the ones experiencing the oppression, but we
Right.
are tired. Like, please understand that this is just the space that we are able to experience and see and what we're feeling, but we know and can acknowledge what the community we work with experiences every day because we see it, we interpret it. So, like, I'm just saying
I
that's
would I would venture to say, I would venture to say that the services that the deaf community could expect to receive would be on such a different level, both in terms of availability and skill set, and it would be a game changer if the profession met all of these characteristics, right?
Yes.
I I, I think it all comes back to supporting deaf consumers
Right.
in their right to
Yes.
effective communication and communication access. Truly,
Yeah.
truly.
I
So we're
know
at
is there one more?
there's one more characteristic.
Phew.
There's one more characteristic. And that saying it labeled that as culture.
Okay.
So culture, right? Essentially like the sense of community within the profession. Now, you had mentioned before crab theory and horizontal violence. Yeah, that is a huge, huge problem in our field. In fact, Afterpay, burnout slash horizontal violence was the number two answer for
Uh,
why interpreters felt that there was a shortage, that this kind of thing is driving interpreters out of the field, which then is tied into attrition. So we have attrition. I don't know if you saw the study that came out of Minnesota that said a quarter of their interpreting
mm.
population was going to be retiring in the next 10 years.
Oh, wow.
I believe that was the stats. The so we didn't our survey didn't ask Arizona interpreters when they're retiring because like who knows that. But
Right.
we did ask interpreters how long they had been working in the field. And the majority have been in the field for 20 years or more, which means the majority are going to be moving out of the field within the
Right.
next 20 years, right?
Right.
And the numbers that are coming in are not balancing the buckets there. So we
And
have attrition from aging out, but we also have attrition from interpreters who are leaving the field because of the burnout, because of the pay, because of all of the things that we've talked about, and going to find a second career,
yeah.
which you and I are not necessarily like we're part of that, right? Me more than you, but you went into teaching,
Teaching. Yep.
right? So now you're
That
balancing
took
your time
away.
between
Hmm.
freelance interpreting and teaching. I went into government and now have a staff position where I'm only interpreting for this agency. I would say that there are of this is super anecdotal and a very small sample size, right? I totally get that. But of my like super close friend group of interpreters, there's almost I think there's two of us that are not staff interpreters or in some
Mm.
kind of staff role that's interpreting adjacent. Two
Because sometimes
out of maybe 15.
maybe those staff positions give you those things of those characteristics of professionalism that
We hope that they do.
I
We're
know
willing,
they probably
we're willing to take the chance, right? We're
right.
willing to take the
Hey,
chance
you
to
get
try it
insurance.
because, and also medical
Hey,
insurance.
yes.
That is not a thing to
Right.
snuff at. So yeah, so this culture, right? This culture, the horizontal violence, all of that definitely plays a role in what we're seeing. The other thing that plays a role in culture, and this was really interesting to me, when Anna Witter-Merrithew and Leilani Johnson did this study in 2009, the when they did this first, like
Oh, first in '09.
the I think it's 2009.
12? Was it 2012? It was
You're may now
no,
I'm
24. Oh my
no no
gosh.
no 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 no. It is.
Oh, oh
Hold on.
04.
2004. Yes, thank you. When
Stupid.
when Witter, Merrithew, and Johnson did this first study where they took Tseng's um, market analysis stuff and put it onto the interpreting field, they scored culture as high. And the reason why they scored the interpreting world, the interpreting field to have a high mark in culture was because of the cohesion between the national level organization and the local chapters of RID. That was one of the mm, hallmarks of culture, that there was not only a national organization, but also grassroots local organizations that were all on the same page. And that I think has changed
Yes, it
dramatically
has.
since
Yes, it has.
2004. I don't know
Yes.
how many affiliate chapters RID had in 2004, but anecdotally, it sounds like they were a lot stronger. Today,
Just in
there
our
is,
career, can't you feel that?
oh, 100%. I mean, by my own personal experience,
Yes, same.
Arizona RID, it has been essentially defunct for
Yes.
over 10 years. I'm not sure, but like a long time. COVID messed
Hmm.
up my sense of timelines for anything, right? But I mean, there's numbers too. Like there are stats that prove it. So apparently, there are 54 local RID chapters all over the country, and RID calls them the backbone of RID. That because we're a member-driven organization, the backbone of RIDs are the affiliate chapter.
I don't feel like the ones I've lived in multiple states and I'm not feeling that they're the strong backbone that holds us together. Like I
Yeah,
want them to be. I think we all want them
we
to
do.
be
We do.
understanding they're volunteer based and understand we have to be the ones to make it happen, but yet it doesn't.
And the numbers reflect that. So when RID analyzed the health of the affiliate chapters, out of the 54 total, only 16 met the criteria to be considered
Ooh,
healthy.
ooh.
And they're
Well,
clo and
and
they're dissolving all over
right.
the,
Folks
the
don't want to do
country.
it. And when it comes to culture, those are like the official labels of because we have the governing organization and then the affiliates. But if we were to even detach from that, like living in multiple states, working now nationally, you get a feel of culture. Um, how quickly can you fit into this community? How can you not? Are there favorites? What agency? We're a weird bunch. Interpreters are just a bunch of weirdos, and it's my favorite because I'm one of them. But it is an interesting culture as we are adjacent to deaf culture, part of it, not part of it, but yet the feeling even at national conferences or street leverage or other places felt different through the years, even that.
Yeah,
So
I agree
I
with
don't
you
know what
100.
the answer is, but
I don't either, but it seems like the answer needs to be systemic. Like I think RAD
something,
has tried to push for like gain membership or do this or do that. And
right?
here in Arizona, we spent years trying to like rekindle that flame. Girl, I think interpreters are tired. And when you look at this list of
I
characteristics
know,
and all of like when it's mapped out for you in this like academic way, like no wonder we are fed up. No wonder
right.
we feel like we are kind of mm, neglected in a way that we tolerate a bunch
Hmm.
to be in this field. Um, I mean, we're tired.
Understandable. I
We're
mean, this
tired,
is
and it's totally understandable.
yeah, and we've covered so much here.
I
Are
know that's
there
a lot.
any, it is a lot. And we can go on. And much of what we talked about will be talked about in future podcasts with so many other guests and so many other conversations. That's kind of what we just talked about for 2 hours is exactly why I wanted to start this podcast, is exactly why I wanted to have these conversations in hopes that if this is talked about more, I'm also sick of talking about it. Here I am talking about it. I'm also wanting action, and I'm not. That's the problem is I'm trying to figure out what that is
Yeah.
by all.
And that was something that in the study that ACDHH did, we touched on lightly. So we asked everybody, all of the stakeholders that took our surveys, we asked all of them, what do you think is contributing to the shortage and what do you think we can do about it? Right? Obviously, there are some of the stakeholders that
Solutions.
don't know our field well enough, so their suggestions were a little like at in left field, right? But the responses from interpreters and interpreting agencies really focused a lot on um, like a PR movement for our
Mm,
field, right? An intentional recruitment effort of new interpreters,
yes.
new people coming into our field. Additionally, the graduation to certification gap, mentorship, changing the culture of like the crab theory and horizontal violence of how we work together. Um, a, there was a lot of sense of community building. Like we need to come together as a
I feel
community
that.
and do a thing. But we say that all the time, right? Like you hear that all the time. Oh, I wish we had more in-person workshops because we never all get together anymore. And then you host an in-person workshop
And
and
people don't
six
come.
people show up,
But I also
right?
want to say maybe workshops is a great way to learn and a great way to provide information and gather. Maybe there's another way. I don't even know what that is. Maybe a
I
podcast, maybe a who
I
knows.
think,
I'm just trying
yes,
to
it needs
think
to be something
morph.
systemic, I think. I
Yes.
think we are trying to fit the current field into a mold that used to work. And we're like, oh, the good old days when we used to do these things and they used to work to check those boxes. Those things aren't checking the boxes anymore. Now,
What do we do?
w- we definitely need new boxes, but man,
Hey,
I,
young and not young, newer interpreters, people who are stepping in, like you often feel unvalued, unheard, and seen. I need you to talk. Tell me, oh my God, what do we tell us what you're
and
seeing and what works for you?
And there are interpreters out there who have these like niche knowledge sets. Like I
So,
immediately think of David Rice. David was one of our cohort mates at Western Oregon, and he had a great insight into like systems and how the sausage was made and organizational like he could tell me stuff about RAD that I had no he was like on it. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Um, like there are people out there who have
that
knowledge and ideas about this kind of things. They have some kind of expertise. Like right
need.
now, I am dying to talk to someone about effective, effective I see. I don't even know what I'm asking. Like, I'm not even kidding. So, gig economies,
Yes.
gig economies. What is a framework that's effective for limited resources in a gig economy to cover the needs of whatever that is? There's some nerd out there who loves economics and like
Yeah.
has ideas about this. But
Yeah.
like, I'm not even kidding. I have reached out to every economic council and professor and like at the state level, I'm reaching out to all the resources I can. And I'm like, what am I looking for? Like, I don't even know what to Google. And no one has been able to give me an answer.
Yeah.
So, like, we need those people that just happen to have those knowledge sets to come together and, like, I don't know, a think tank, maybe be on this
Oh, I've
podcast.
thought of that too. I've thought of think tanks.
Me too.
Um,
Me too.
we can wrap up. We've said a lot. Is there any last couple sentences or brief wrap up that you want to make sure people leave with?
Yeah. So, I would love to see people get more involved, right? And understand the inner workings of our field a little bit better, mainly because when you have these conversations, either in the parking lot or on social media, it's so easy for us to throw out solutions. I don't understand why we don't just blah, blah, blah. Well, look into it.
Do it. Yes.
If it hasn't happened yet, there's probably a good reason why, and it's probably because we don't understand like the greater system enough to recognize how challenging that is, right? So become part of the solution. Educate yourselves. Talk like I can only speak for Arizona, but I am dying for interpreters to discuss these kinds of things with. Dying.
Yeah.
So be part of the solution. But I also want to say that one of the big points that we made here was there's not enough interpreters coming into the field. And if a person were interested in becoming an interpreter and then they watched these two parts of a podcast, they'd probably
Yay!
run screaming like their hair
Right.
was on fire, right? I I I I want everybody to look at this information through the lens of my job, my task at hand was to uncover the problems and then connect the dots. So just like any field, there are challenges. Um, we feel like we have more challenges than most. I don't know if that's true. I've never been anything but an interpreter, but it is such a rewarding and amazing field. And all of us are here for a reason. All of us are talking about these challenges because we
We
care
care.
so much. So if you are a prospective, emerging interpreter and you want to get into this field and this information just made you poop your pants, please, please.
We
This
need you
is
in your poopy pants, please.
this is a small subset of what it's like to be an interpreter. This does not define the interpreting experience by any means. And if you care about this, then we we need
Need
we
you.
need we need people who are going to care about the good stuff and the challenging stuff, right? Just like being in any relationship. So
And if people want to
consider
read,
consider dating interpreting.
there you go. If people want to, you have a presentation and you, I know, have a big write-up and they can find this actual study where
Yes. So if you want to read the actual study, if you're real bored,
you're gonna go sleepy.
because it is a legit thesis. If you want to read the study, or we also gave several virtual town halls where I presented a summary of this material, and then recorded it. You can access both on the ACDHH website. So the web address is www.acdhh.org. Again, that's A as in apple, C as in cat, D as in dog, H as in hotel, H as in hotel.org. Once you pull up the home screen, if you scroll down, there is a purple button that says AZ Interpreter Shortage Study. And if you click that button, it'll take you to a page where both the recording of the town hall and the actual study are there available to anybody who wants to take a look. And if you want to talk about this stuff some more, please reach out to me. I'd love that.
Please. Is your
Maybe
contact info in that?
and
Okay.
we can probably put my contact
Yeah.
info in like the show notes or whatever.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And at the end of episodes, I love guests to highlight a deaf-owned business or deaf organization or a deaf influencer or someone to highlight in the field. So who do you want to bring attention to?
I would love to highlight a business called Ergologics. It's Ergologics. Ergologics.
Ergo. Okay.
Ergologics. So the owner of that business is Dr. Rhonda Moriarty. She is a deaf doctor of physical therapy, and she specializes in ergonomics. She
Ooh.
especially
Ooh.
specializes in ergonomics for interpreters. So she has been contracted all over the country to come give ergonomic assessments so you can learn how to sit at your desk and and set up your screens and do all the things to reduce the amount of pain that you have as you work in like a stationary
Amazing.
position. She has saved my interpreting career. And she is literally like when people describe salt of the earth people, like they are describing her. She's hysterical. She's the sweetest, goodest. She's one of those people that when she walks in the room, her like energy is just like sunshine. She's the
Ergologics.
she's the most
Awesome.
wonderful person in the whole world, and I want to be just like her when I grow up. So I would love to spotlight Ergologics.
I love that. My friend, I knew we could not do this in 1 hour.
I had a feeling.
I knew we needed to break this into two, and thank you all for hanging in for these 2 hours. There was so much in there and so much more that needs to be talked about, and we
Truly.
will. Thank you all for hanging in, and thank you so much, Cameo, for the work you did for this research, for bringing it to us, and hopefully there's more that do that we can have this conversation and move forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you.